come up to the mic? Because I think it should be on. Somebody test it.
Hi, thank you. My name is Patricia. I'm the president of Congregational in Mount Kisco, New York. So some implications that I didn't see up on your great presentation is I have a really old building with a leaky roof and a minister I have to pay. I'm thinking sell the building and build a coffee shop in the center of town. But we still have people who come. You say congregations are central. We still have older people who need that Sunday experience, and the balance of trying to reach those two. My second point is that the people who do a lot of social media, this generation is used to free stuff. They don't want to pay for the newspaper. They don't want to pay to come to my congregation. They love what we do. They'll want to maybe show up for a social action project, but they're not giving me dollars to pay for my building and my minister. And also the part about social media and people making a change, those 14-year-old girls are cool, but a lot of people these days think that they've made a difference by signing a petition on change.org, and they're done. So I still see showing up as being the key. So we're talking about people making connections with each other, and yet being at home, I get the interactive piece, but it seems a lot more passive to me than interactive. The interactive, you got to be with people. So I got all those
things going around. Well, the number one question, I'm not surprised this happens every time, is how do we pay for this? And I wish I had a great answer for you. I don't know how we pay for this. I don't think we're going to pay for this by forcing people to sign a membership book. Because they're not going to. They're not going to come to us in order to pay for our buildings or even our ministers. They're going to come to us because we provide motivating spiritual experiences, and in many kinds of multitude of ways. Does not mean that congregations, again, have to go away or can't be financially sustainable, but we have to think about different ways in which they can invest in that. That I think membership is going to be an obsolete concept in 50 years. Now, can we deal with that by saying, I think everybody should be members that give? I can do that. I can do that. It's not going to make the world change. It's not going to make that happen. There are different modes of funding that we are looking into. There's the whole Kickstarter model where people are able to put their profound ideas out there and see who wants to invest in them. And there's also a multitude of ways of people having access. So my view is that we're eventually going to have a lot of things that are free as a way of getting people to help understand what it is that we're about and how they can be involved and what kinds of things have opportunities. So for instance, Tapestry of Faith. How many of you use Tapestry of Faith? Entirely free. Entirely free. Paid for by a wonderful donor from the UUA, by the way. Now, it's also possible that you may have experienced the irritation of you can't bring your computer into the classroom to have access to it, right? It's hard you have to print all those things off yourself. I think there are a lot of people out there who would pay to have a bound version of Tapestry of Faith. Doesn't mean it's not still free. It means we're making it accessible in different kinds of ways that people will pay for. So when you have experiences that people are obviously responding to, finding a way then to build upon that, to get their interest in financially supporting it, I think is the direction we're going to have to go. Do I have really clear and good answers about that? No, I don't. And we're going to have to develop them because that's the direction our culture is going. So back to your, what do we do with our leaky building? I think the question is, how can you make your building to be a vital center in the community that people are going to be willing to invest in different kinds of ways besides just coming to church on Sunday morning?
A question about...
you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, Matthew Johnson Doyle in Rockford, Illinois. Thank you, Teresa. And we've talked about this, but a question which I think this group might find interesting, and it just occurred to me. Many of our congregations are beginning to experiment with multi-site, and they're getting there either by partnerships with existing congregations together or by creating satellites. And it occurs to me that there is a relationship, as yet to be figured out, between congregations and beyond and multi-site, in the sense that we are the Unitarian Universalists in this metro region, and we are one, because they're having a singular social media experience of Unitarian Universalism more likely than they are just with one church. So I don't know if you have thoughts about the connection between multi-site.
Absolutely. It's definitely one of the things we're looking into, Matthew. Thank you. And I don't have time to detail a whole bunch of all the different things we're looking at, but that's a huge one. So Houston, for example, anybody here from the Houston congregation? Yeah. The First Unitarian Church in Houston has now a partnership with the two other churches, Horizon and Emerson. No, there's two smaller churches that Thoreau and Copperfield. Okay. Anyway, the two smaller congregations that were finding it incredibly difficult to maintain their leaky buildings and to pay a minister made an agreement with First Unitarian Church, the larger church downtown, to have one single staff that serves all three sites. So it's much more sustainable economically for three congregations to invest in a common staff that can be served different kinds of ways. You see where we're going? So absolutely, Matthew, we have to think about these kind of multi-site situations as opportunities to move in a way that we don't need to simply build a whole bunch of new buildings out there. There's so many ways in which congregations can grow up in smaller. I think we're on the verge of a new fellowship movement, where people are going to be able to create their community experiences without having to have a building that can be sourced by an existing congregation. Does that make sense? Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm Sarah Gibb Millspot in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I'm curious, you talked about moving from age segregation to multi-generational. And one of the things that we've struggled with as a multi-generational congregation is that the youth in our church don't even use email anymore, but many of the elders in our church don't even use email. And so how do we do multi-generational when technology itself is separating the generations so much?
It's huge. So to me, what that says there is we have to educate people about social media as much as possible. And I know some congregations are now having Twitter feeds during the church. We're going to have to get over our thing about not having our devices in front of us in church. We're going to have to recognize that people find a multiplicity of ways to interact that may not be sitting wrapped looking at the minister, but may actually be still involved in what's happening. So that is a huge, big generational gap we're talking about. Huge. And I think that we're going to have to train people from the ground up. And the challenge, of course, is that the new technology that comes around tomorrow is probably not going to be there 10 days from now. And so that's one of we have to become adept at learning new technologies, not just taught one. And so it has to become a whole communal enterprise with people willing to go there. And it's scary.
Free Twitter and Facebook lessons at church
Yes.
to draw people in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Hi, Michael.
Good morning. Michael Benefield from the Cedar Lane Church in Bethesda, Maryland. Our relationship to our institutions, and I'm thinking of magic words like trust, transparency, accountability. And I know something because I've lived in a building and a worship community that comes together on Sunday mornings about how transparency and accountability and that other one come together in that. But how do we do all of those important things, values for this network of people that I don't know, this lovely, I'll take away the image of all these people connecting in the CLF from all over the world, but I don't know who exactly they are. I'm struggling with how I relate in a meaningful, authentic, engaging way with strangers that I don't know anything about or much.
Sure. So there's a level of trust there, right? And I think that means we have to start with values. We have to start with shared values, not with shared outcomes. So it's not about people having to share the decision that I've made. It's about helping people to engage in a conversation about the values that are most important to us. So we're trying desperately to move toward having an entirely different kind of site that's not a website that's passive, but a way in which people can participate by creating a profile of themselves as Unitarian Universalists, and be able to connect with other people in their geographic area, or be able to upload their own videos, upload their own blog posts, all of these different things, so that we can connect across congregations, and across all kinds of different communities. And the first thing that people say when I talk about this is, oh my God, what about those crazy people out there who might have some... And the great thing about some of these media sites is that what happens is they become self-selected. So think about Facebook. The first thing that comes up is the thing that most people like. So you can actually find a way to reward good behavior through the proper use of the media. And the other stuff can drop to the bottom. So it requires us to be diligent in our reward of values. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So the question is, how do we make transparent those values and trust that that means the people that we want to connect with are going to show up for that connection? And I'd be interested in what happens with the small group experiences here at GA. You don't know. I mean, you can trust that they're Unitarian Universalists, but you don't know who's going to show up in that small group. And I bet for a lot of people that's going to be a transformative experience to be able to connect. How much more transformative is it to connect with somebody you have no idea about than with somebody that you already know? So,
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Jim.
I'm Jim McKinley, the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Hendersonville. I'm the minister there. One of the things, I really appreciate your presentation, and one of the things that I find, I think I've begun to think of religion as a word of orientation. It's how do we orient the world? So not Unitarian Universalists, it's who are the people who share these orientations of an inclusive universe, inspired teachings of what it means to live well, and engaged action to bring that vision, those teachings real in the world and in our lives. So in your presentation, you didn't say much about that sorting engine, how to inspire that. I look at all the information, and it's how do you sort it? How does the brain sort it? How does it make sense simply of this, all of this? And so, could you speak a little bit to that? When you're using the word values, but kind of that sharing of wisdom, really, of message, of orientation, which when I begin to connect with it, it makes this stuff fairly simple. And then it makes what you're offering tools that I just go, okay, we just move into that,
Right.
and it gives it context. And that's what I do think the UUA can help do, and it's not doing, because it's avoiding that sense of, I don't want to tell you what our message is, but we do have one. We have an orientation that's shared with these other groups. So what is the conversation for kind of helping us?
Well, yeah, and it's a question that we grapple with a lot, and unfortunately, it's about 2 weeks too early. Peter mentioned this during his talk. We've been working with a branding person that we were all like, ooh, branding. And he's really been able to help us distill our message in some profound ways. And so in about a month, we're going to roll out something that's going to approximate what you're talking about, Jim. So I just can't show it to you right now. It's very exciting. But I absolutely agree with you that it's got to be not just a message that's about social justice, it's got to be a spiritual message. And you articulated it beautifully right there, Jim. What did you just say? And your building articulates it. I had the pleasure of visiting Jim's new sanctuary, which has a physical representation of those values, not just a verbal representation of those values.
Right, and it's all held within the bigger picture of a sense of something more. And we've been living it for 5 years now. We've been developing it, and now it's a part of who we are. And our failure in this is that Peter doesn't know that we exist because we've just been doing it, and we haven't been doing this work. So when you talk about a consultant and branding, nobody's been in touch with us, but we also haven't been in touch with them. So we're not
this
part of this.
This is where we get back to the spiritual innovation piece, and I want to, I want to see a central message come from us that makes it really clear what we're about spiritually and in the world. And we cannot do it just because Peter will talk about it. It has to be all of us. You articulated it beautifully. I know every congregation has ways of articulating it. If we find ways to distill it in particular ways that are unique, because you can talk about it in Hendersonville differently than you're going to talk about it in Anchorage, Alaska. So find ways to distill that message, make it representative of who you know the core of us to be, and do it. Don't wait for a message to come from Peter.
No,
it doesn't have to only do that.
All I'm saying is that when you say, what is the job of the UUA, I would just add that into your line
I agree.
of how do we, what did you say, interpret, and what was your other word?
Curate.
Curate, and that's in that line, I
Absolutely.
think.
Absolutely. Yep, agreed. Hi.
I'm Michelle Buhite, the minister of the UU Church of Spartanburg, South Carolina. And I don't have a question, I have a thank you. Teresa was our keynote speaker in March at our cluster conference, and we got all jazzed. And first we're overwhelmed, and then jazzed. So we are launching an interactive website that our regular site is sort of the threshold to. And we're targeting lifespan faith development, particularly children through young adults, for our first foray, and creating I hope, the space for that sort of interactivity. So
send me a link.
Thank you. Yeah.
Send me a link. I want to see it. Great. Thanks, Michelle.
Edmund Robinson, the UU Meeting House in Chatham, Massachusetts, at the elbow of Cape Cod. Every time I hear about beyond congregations, I'm reminded of my history with the organization, with the movement, how there were 1,000 flowers blooming in the late 90s, early aughts, and then the board enacted this anti-affiliation, disaffiliation policy, and brought a lot of that creative energy, to my mind, to a halt, or at least damped it. The exhibit hall at General Assembly used to be populated by about 15 more booths, 50 more booths than is there right now. We have a lot of staff ideas, staff presence, but we don't have the upwelling of creativity that we used to have. The other thing about beyond congregations is what happens to the idea of covenant. We're supposed to be a movement founded on covenant. The covenant is the basis of the congregation. Do we have extra congregational structures that will be also founded on covenant with accountability, with responsibility? I'm also suspicious of the idea of a branding that we're going to come out to 4 words that everybody can agree on. Because I think the history of Unitarian Universalism is that we speak with many voices, and we speak across those differences. And I understand the problem of public relations of telling the world something about who we are, but do we lose something in that? I don't have any answers. I just put the questions up.
Yeah, no, I think that was a mistake, and I think that what happened was dealing with the problem with a few by taking a hatchet to the many. And so I think that's conflict avoidance that we love to engage in. And so being able to connect to those partnerships are a really important part of what we're trying to do, to recognize, as I said, what's happening out there. So looking at what's happening at our camps and conferences, there are people, thousands of people go to those things who never come to a congregation. Why are we just saying, no, we don't pay attention to you? So it's definitely a part of what we're doing.
I have a list of 5 things, but people in line, so I'm just going to say thanks for helping us not be stuck in the mud. I'm curious, on the UUA website, you're doing a great job of putting lots of reminders that this has to get paid for someplace, and here's a link where you can click to support us. Do you have any data on how does any money come in from folks who are not connected with UU congregations? That's one thing. I'd also be curious to hear from you and anyone else in the room if anyone is welcoming contributions in technology-forward ways, like from cell phones. Like you can send a text to donate money for disaster relief. Our church database provider had something I saw that they can help us do that. But I'm wondering if
I highly
anyone
encourage
knows
people
that.
to do that. The more accessible you make it, a lot of people experimented with that about 10 years too early and then decided it didn't work and stopped doing it.
And not because it's a major source of money, because it's a
right.
major source of relationship building.
Access and relationship. But to your answer, your question about, we don't have total numbers about just that button, but I can tell you that 60% of the major donors to UUA are not members of congregations.
Wow.
60% of the major donors.
Perhaps because we're not so welcoming of the 1% as we could be. Seriously. All over again.
Can I ask you to skip your notes just in honor of other people, because we only have a couple more minutes. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Martha Malkowitz, and I'm from the Buffalo UU Congregation in Buffalo, New York. And we have a beautiful building which requires just tons of money, and we are leaping forward with trying to find ways to keep ourselves incredibly vital, which I think we are. But I have 2 points. One of them is that I feel as if I am on that point in society where there's a major change, and that this is the change from the early 1900s when there was loads of money and churches went up, big beautiful buildings went up right and left, and we're seeing them all come down. And I feel like we're on that. I'm in that change, and I will fight for my building, but change will come, and we may be going back to just simple in-house meetings. But what I miss with all of the discussion on interaction in Facebook is my own limitation with that. I'm fairly blind and dumb with words. I do not feel comfortable interacting with people through words. They cannot hear the tone of my voice. They cannot see the expression on my face, and vice versa. And I'm not sure where all of this kind of interaction is going to leave people like me. I depend on the group experience, and I love the size of my church, and yet I feel like I'm saying, I don't want to hold anything back in terms of progression, but I feel as if I am saying that what is left for me, and maybe not me, but maybe 30 years later or 50 years later, is interaction with 5 or 6 people and not this wonderful sense of church.
Well, I don't think it has to be either or. I really don't believe in either or. I will encourage you to experiment with video conferencing, because that's where most of this is going. It is not just words. It is video interactions. So that's one piece of it. But I think we're in a phase of explosion of innovation, and then we're going to come back to a phase of institutionalization at some point. So take comfort in that. We're not, but it's going to be very different. So I appreciate your concern, and I think that we still have that role. We just have to figure out how to provide the small group experiences within that. Matt, you're going to get to be the last one. Sorry.
I live in the Lucy Stone Co-op, which is a UU housing cooperative where 13 of us live together in a huge house in Boston. And I wanted to speak to the fundraising part. At our kickoff fundraising party, we raised $14,000, and half of the 170 people that came were not Unitarian Universalists. So one piece of that fundraising was that we had lots of people who were not UU donating money to a Unitarian Universalist congregation because the work that we were doing was still so relevant to their experience, and I think that's what we'll find in a lot of these scenarios. And the other is that then once we use that money to purchase a house, then it is self-sustaining, so all of our rent dollars are, instead of pledging, we pay our rent, and that pays for Unitarian Universalist community. I think that's the same thing with Beloved Cafe. What if the coffee that you bought paid for Unitarian Universalist community? What if the rent you paid? What if the equity in your house? There's all these other ways that I think that we'll begin to see a shift in that way. And also what's interesting for us was that we didn't actually use a lot of social media, but we had that kind of small group experience, 13 people, instead of having lots of friends on Facebook, we moved in together. So I just wanted to offer that up as a different model for funding and the beyond. Thank you for this.
Great, thanks, Matt. I want to point out really quickly, Peter Bowden, who's at the back of the room, is an excellent teacher of social media. And you can utilize him as one to help your congregation move in these directions, and we're going to have many more resources for that. So thank you for your attention.